Kaku. My name is Anthony Alto. I am the chair of the Government Affairs and Legal Matters Committee of the Honolulu Authority for Rapid Transportation, and I am calling that meeting into order. It is September the 1st at 9:12 a.m. The first thing I'd like to do is note the fact that we do not have a voting quorum, and so I'm going to exercise my authority as chair to appoint another voting member, and I pick Colleen Hanabusa. Thank you so much, Colleen, for filling in our ranks. Having said that, I'll call the roll. Ed Sniffen is excused. Michelle Chun Brungraber is excused. Roger Morton? Here. Colleen Hanabusa?
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. Thank you all, and apologies for the slightly late start. We have one item of business on our agenda today, which is Resolution 2023-9, approving notification to the City Council of our intention to acquire by eminent domain an easement in the real property identified as tax map key 11-2-012-013, located at 610 Pu'uhale Road, Honolulu, Hawaii 96819, owned by TNI Properties, LLC. And before I go any further, do we have anybody either in the room or attending by Zoom who wishes to testify, Cindy?
We don't have any public testimony, Chair.
No public testimony. Given the nature of this item, I believe what I'd like to do is consult with our attorneys, which requires us going into executive session. I'll cite the statute. The board may enter into executive session pursuant to Hawaii Revised Statute Section 92-4, subsection 92-5A3, to deliberate concerning the authority of persons designated by the board to conduct labor negotiations or to negotiate the acquisition of public property, or during the conduct of such negotiations, subsection 92-5A4, to consult with its attorneys on questions and issues on a matter pertaining to the board's powers, duties, privileges, immunities, and liabilities, and subsection 92-5A8, to deliberate or make a decision upon a matter that requires the consideration of information that must be kept confidential pursuant to a state or federal law or a court order. And of course, following the amendment that was passed by the legislature earlier this year, when we come out of our executive session, I'll be making a brief summary of our conversation, that which can be shared with the public. Can I hear a resolution to that effect, please? To go into executive session.
And second.
It's been proposed and seconded. Hearing no discussion, it's so resolved, and I'd like us to now move into that executive session. If you could take us there, please, Cindy. Thank you. We are back from executive session. We used the opportunity of the executive session to consult with our attorneys regarding some of the specific language in the resolution. We did not hear the public presentation, and we will proceed to that now. And I did not explain at the start of this meeting, the reason I'm chairing it remotely is because I have COVID. I apologize if I sound a little woolly. Is it Krista who's going to make the public presentation?
Yes, Chair.
Please proceed.
We start with an overview map of the property along with the easement area. The easement area is shown as easement A on the slide. It is the full frontage of the property, but the easement is limited to underground and a manhole at the surface. There is not any above ground other than that. And HECO, there would also be the right for access to maintain if needed. For some background, it is necessary for the utilities to be relocated along Dillingham Corridor in preparation for construction of the rail project. This includes undergrounding the 138 kV line that is currently overhead in the area. Part requires an easement across the subject property to accommodate the relocation of the 138 kV line. The easement is needed for placement of a utility underground and a manhole for maintenance purposes. Hart is acquiring the property rights pursuant to the Hart and HECO Utility Inspection Property Transfer Agreement dated May 16th, 2018 for the Airport Guideway City Center section. The amount of just compensation for the property has been determined according to the Uniform Act. Hart presented an offer to acquire a non-exclusive electrical easement to the owner of the property in March of 2023. The owner rejected the offer after being given a reasonable time to consider it. In order to adhere to the project construction schedule, it is necessary to refer the property to condemnation. Efforts will be made to continue negotiations with the owner with the goal of reaching an amicable and reasonable settlement. Easement rights will be assigned to HECO once condemnation has been finalized. The eminent domain process, upon approval of this resolution, Hart will inform the City Council of its intent to acquire the property by eminent domain. The City Council will then have 45 days to approve or object to the condemnation by adopting a resolution. They also have the right to take no action. Upon approval or no action by the City Council, the Board of Directors will be requested to approve a resolution authorizing the acquisition of the property by eminent domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Just want to clarify and underline a couple of points. The first one is that there will be no permanent above ground construction in this easement. Everything is underground. And the second point is that during the construction required for the use that we will subsequently make of this easement, there will be no interference with the business activities of the property owner. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have met with the property owner a few times and talked about access. The work is scheduled to be done during evening hours as per Hart's traffic control plan. That's between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. is when the work would be done. Steel plates would be put over any trenching that may be required so that their trucks could access the property. Once the work is complete and the property is put back to its natural state, there's nothing that will remain above ground.
Thanks, Krista. I better double check again with Cindy. Is there any member of the public who has joined us since we previously asked who may wish to testify on this?
No, Chair, no testimony.
Members, thoughts?
Anthony?
Pauline?
Thank you. Just so that we're clear, when we're talking about the undergrounding on Pu'uhale, it's off of Dillingham. So are you undergrounding the lines from Dillingham under Pu'uhale and having a daylight in the property? What are you exactly doing with that?
It's my understanding that it will underground in front of the property and then come above ground right outside of the property.
So it's undergrounding on from Dillingham is what you're saying, right?
That's correct.
So it's going ever. Is it going ever?
That's my understanding.
So, and just so that the other thing is that when I reviewed your resolution, this resolution is very different. I think it's the first one that you've drafted in this present form, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And the reason that you've drafted this resolution in its present form is that there's technically sort of a two-step process that was being anticipated. And it was all in the interest of transparency, so we should let the public know that that's what the intent was to inform the public. And what the what you're trying to inform the public about is the fact that though this easement is basically for the undergrounding of the lines, part of this process is that once it is approved, the condemnation is approved on the easement, whether it's by purchase or by court proceeding, whatever it may be, that the easement will be basically turned over to Hawaiian Electric. The rights to the easement.
That's
underground.
correct. With the exception of if it's actually purchased through negotiation, it would be conveyed directly to HECO. It would not be directed to the city and county of Honolulu. But if the court order is obtained through condemnation, our intent then would be to come back and ask for disposition to assign it to HECO.
So that I can understand this, what you're saying is that Hart is negotiating with the landowner of property 610 Pu'uhale Road, and if an agreed to amount that Hart is going to pay is agreed to, then we and the city and county of Honolulu are out of the picture, and at that point, HECO gets the rights to the easement directly from the landowner.
Yes, that's how the easements are negotiated.
So if that's the case, then we have taken a position, I think it was in this committee before, that certain rights to the HECO, whenever there's a HECO-related type of easement, that the Hart retains certain rights. So that's no longer relevant because Hart is no longer involved in this.
That's correct. That's between the landowner and HECO. And the provisions that you're referring to in the past were on Hart-owned property where we retain the right. That's correct.
And I thought that that's exactly what we're doing here, but we're only doing that if the condemnation is required and Hart assumes the ownership interest, and then we would transfer. We're not transferring the total ownership, though it is an easement, the ownership of the easement. What we're doing is we're transferring the whole thing to HECO even after condemnation.
The final judgment, the final order of condemnation, so the rights we get through that final order would be assigned to HECO.
But the court can only grant it to whomever is a party to the lawsuit. HECO is not a party to that lawsuit.
And that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The city and county of Honolulu, technically, the way the charter works and the statute works on it, will become the quote unquote, the owner of the easement, correct?
That's correct. That's why we would come back for disposition approval through you and through the board, and then also through city council.
So then the board, you would come back to the board, and the board would then have to say, okay, you may transfer this easement to HECO, and then it has to have the final approval of city council.
That's right, by way of an assignment is how it would be transferred to HECO.
And there is no compensation for that.
Under the agreement from 2018, there is no compensation.
And I did make a request for a copy of that agreement.
And I will provide it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So so that we're clear, we're going to do all of this potentially. And in the end, we don't have any ownership interests. It will, either way, whether you negotiate it or you go to condemnation, the ownership interest of the easement goes to HECO.
That's correct.
So one of the requests that I have, Mr. Chair, is that we separate out of this resolution the assumption that we are going to transfer to HECO. And I think what we need to do is we need to see how it plays out, whether it's a negotiated settlement or whether we have to go to condemnation for it to be a cleaner transaction. And I would recommend that we do a friendly amendment to this resolution to that extent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair, for that friendly amendment. Do I hear a second?
We don't have a motion yet.
Oh, sorry.
Well, can we continue the
I thought that is
discussion
your
if anybody
speech in
else has
favor.
anything else? Okay.
Any further discussion?
To do the friendly amendment.
I think
You'd like-
technically we have to do the motion first and then we amend the motion. Is that right? I'm looking at Dan Gluck. However you want to do it. So you want to do the friendly amendment first?
Well, yeah, I'll do the friendly amendment, to the, proposed resolution.
Okay, and I'll do a second. Mr. Chair?
Thank you. It's been proposed and seconded. Do I hear any further discussion?
Nope.
Hearing none, the friendly amendment is adopted.
Roger has
Any-
his hand up to make the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I cannot see anything.
Sorry, that's why I'm telling you.
Chair,
Thank you. Yes, Roger, go ahead.
I'll make the motion for the resolution to be passed.
And I'll second that, and it's now the resolution, just so we're clear, with a friendly amendment as amended.
Any discussion on the motion as amended? Hearing none, the motion is adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that, I think, is the only item on our agenda. So I think at this point, I can adjourn this meeting. It's 10:20. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good morning. It's 10:46 and the Finance Committee meeting is called to order. So first order of business, I'm gonna do roll call. Vice Chair Edwin Young.
Here.
Member Kika Pukowski.
Present.
Roger Morton.
Here.
And Art Tolentino is excused and Michelle is Bum Grabber is excused. We have non-member Hard Board Chair Colleen Hanabusa here. Colleen?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And and we have non-member Natalie Iwasa. Natalie?
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And we also have two non-finance committee members on Zoom. Anthony Alto,
Present.
Joe O'Connell.
Here.
Thank you. So cash flow report and financial update. Are there any?
Chair? Chair?
Yes.
Just for the sake of the audience participating via Zoom, your sound, your audio keeps cutting out. I think you'll agree, Joseph, wouldn't you?
Okay. I couldn't hear him. Yeah, it keeps turning off.
Yeah. The mic, move it by the neck, because if you move it by the base.
Oh, okay. All right. Got it. Thank you. Rick and Brent. Hi, Rick. Good morning.
Ready?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to review the cash flow reports. And the first one that's in your package, the top 3 pages, is the annual report. So I'll start with that one. So I want to point out some of the changes that we made from the last time we presented. One change, and this was something that has been discussed by Robert and Kika quite a bit, is we added a column. It's currently the second column, the first column of numbers, current contract value. That was a request of Robert in order to be able to compare expenditures with contract value. I understand there's been a request to move it over to the right side of the page. We'll get that moved next month so that it's more easy to compare the columns. That was added. The other big change, the only other big change on this particular report is in the bond area. As you know, in August, the city closed on new bond issuance. PAR participated in that. We closed on 141 million of new bonds. Those were contrary to some of the articles that were in the newspaper. Those bonds were entirely used to retire a previous bond issuance. The previous bond issuance was about 175 million, but because of some principal payments that were made in 2023, FY23, and because it was a premium generated at the time of issuance, the new bonds are in the amount of 142 million, which is a pretty substantial decrease from the previous outstandings. That helps us in the long run. That'll reduce interest expense over the remaining term of those bonds. So this reflects in the top part of the schedule, it reflects the bond proceeds of the 142 million and the premium. And Chair, for your request, we did take that same percentage premium on the principal and then estimate what premiums could be on future forecasted bond issuances and made those adjustments as well. So you can see that in 26, 27, and 28. Offsetting that, where I mentioned that we use those bond proceeds to repay the 2019 E-bond issuance. At the bottom of the second page, toward the bottom, you can see debt service and the line item for the GO principal bond repayment. And so for 2024, you see a $200 million amount there. Predominantly, that's the $175 million bond issuance that was repaid. Actually, though, in 2023, there were some premiums paid on that bond. So the 200 includes, out of that 2019 E-bond, it includes about 150 million or so for the 2019 E final payoff. And then the remaining 50 or so million in there is for bond premiums paid on some of the other bond issuances. So we have started paying on most of the bond issuances, making principal payments through BFS. I do want to point out, one of the things that I normally check on these is to make sure that the TECP proceeds over the course of the project and the GO bond proceeds are offset down here at the bottom with the repayments. In this case, the GO bond payment amount does not offset the proceed amount. And the reason for that is we are still working with BFS to finalize the repayment schedule because of that refinancing and the new bond. The repayment schedule over the remaining term of the project is going to change, and we don't have those final numbers. But when we do get those numbers trued up, then we'll fix this and make sure that those amounts offset. Similarly, there should be changes over the remaining term on interest expense also. So there's a couple of outstanding cleanup items related to that bond issuance that we'll make as soon as we have the information. Are there any questions on this annual report?
Any questions, member? Natalie?
Yeah, thank you. So I was wondering also if you had changed, what you did was you combined the actual.
Natalie? No.
Wait, sorry. What you did was you combined the actuals from June 23 and put them in that first column so that it's all in the project to date numbers. And I was wondering when you did that, it looks like there were some changes. For example, that 60,000 in the bonds that I had asked about during the last meeting, that now has been corrected. And then in the some of the expenditures, for example, down in the administrative area have changed. So I was wondering if you could tell us what those line items were and as far as the expenditures, why those changes were made?
Actually, I can't. Brett, do you have any idea on changes were made? So you're saying we took the 22 column?
I'm sorry, it was the June 2023. So from the last cash flow that was presented, there was the actual for June fiscal year 23. And now that's been combined with the project to date numbers, which that totally makes sense. But I'm just wondering why some of the numbers
Were any changes made
changed.
in the June numbers?
There might, because, I'll have to get back to you on that, just as a reminder, because, June is part of fiscal 23 and had not yet closed. So there may have been some reconciliations as far as, fiscal 23. That is now, fiscal 23 should be closed now. So you should not see any further changes, but that could have been a result of that. I'll have to get back to you just.
Okay. All right. Then on this, you didn't mention this in your discussion, Rick, but I'm just wondering, I'm curious, on the second page, for example, the PA 101, PA 103, they have no current contract value. Why is that?
That's the mitigation budget, but aside for the contract and contracts.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Mitigation budget for?
So there's a few of those where, good morning, Park Project Director Nate Meddings. There's a few of those that actually don't have contracts yet. And so that specific one is budget money set aside for our programmatic agreement commitments that we're going to spend on, but we currently don't have any contracts to support that work.
Okay, thank you. And I think that was it for the annual presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions on the annual cash flow? Okay, if not, oh, go ahead, Roger. Go.
Just so I understand how to read this, for example, when I look at the H2R2 ramp, I see some little bit of money that was previously expended, and I don't see anything else. Is there no estimates for that, or how has that been descoped from the project, or?
No, sir, that is complete. So that's remaining money there. The blue recognizes that those contracts are PAL, or those CPTs are PAL. We're not expecting any more expenditures there. So really, if anything's highlighted blue, it should be all PAL.
Well, help me out on that. I mean, that's the H2 ramp to the Pearl Highland Station?
No, sir, that's the existing ramp that's out there that we constructed a few years ago. The H2R1 ramp is part of the part of the Pearl Highlands CPP, which is DB 275.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Chair Hanabusa.
Yes. Looking at the prior annual financial plan to Civic Center and the one that we just received now. And I'm looking at the cash balance at the end of the fiscal year 2031. So we have, of course, earlier we only had about 100 and something $1 million. This one we're almost up to 500 million. Yeah. And the time before that we were at well, this is the one I have from the time before. We have 464 million. So can you tell me what was the difference between the original, which was about 100 and something million, which is what we thought, and I think it may have been in the recovery plan, and now we're at, then we go to 464, then we go to 496, almost 500.
Yeah, and this is the forecast, and it's going to continue to bounce around and change. The recovery plan originally had $120 million expected surplus at the end of the project. We discussed before, when we went in and made that change and took a harder look at debt and assumed TECP instead of the full borrowings, and we were able to also reduce the amount of the total borrowings as we took further looks at this. there was about a $250 million benefit on interest expense. So that's the majority of the change between the recovery plan and the 400 or so. In addition, we had a $64 million additional federal grant. It's not been received yet, but it's in process. That wasn't in the recovery plan and is now in here. And then the final big thing, and I don't remember off the top of my head the dollar amount, I want to say somewhere in the $40 to $50 million range, was the cumulative positive positive variance on GET and TAT collections. Those items is what took us to the 450 or so million last month. Then this month, as I mentioned up top, we did assume the premiums, which will basically fall through to positive cash because it reduces the principal amount of the borrowings. So those premium amounts that we added, the 4.2, 36, and 19, that's roughly 50, 55 million. That is the majority of the change from last month. And like I said, that's got to get trued up. The overall debt cash flow situation's got to get trued up. We think that I expect that the interest expense is going to come down slightly over time since the new issuance is less than what we had before. And then also we have to true up with BFS the principal repayments. Right now, the principal repayments that we show on here is 2.18 versus 2.12. So that's about 60 million. So that additional 60 million, once we get that reconciled, that may also increase the remaining or the estimated ending cash surplus. So that number is still changing around a bit, but those are the big factors so far that have increased that amount.
And you know, one of the things that I was always watching was the bond premiums, and you kindly adjusted it in the most recent one by taking the percentage. But if you look at the prior one, the prior financial plan to the present financial plan, and I have no idea, this is July and I assume this was June's, the bond premium received before was 143,518. And then, of course, I think that there was, and that was to fiscal year 21. And then there was 96 million for 22. And after that, there's nothing reflected in the other one. So I assume that what that's supposed to give us is 239 between fiscal year 721 and fiscal year 2022 in terms of actuals and what you've estimated. Am I correct? This is about a $71 million.
Yes.
And you did this by basically taking the percentage of the bond premiums that we received in the past and going by what you think we're gonna float in terms of GO bonds. Is that correct?
Well, what we did on the future ones, 26, 27, 28, we looked at the 24 issuance, the one that we just did.
Mm-hmm.
And that 12 million on the $140 million bond issuance, we used that percentage to then estimate what the 26, 27, and 28 premiums may be.
So you anticipate the floating in terms of GO bonds a total of almost $782 million for the from fiscal year, let me go working backward, 24 to the, I guess the last year you're going to float is fiscal year 2028. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct.
And then you're going to put in TECP in fiscal years 2025, which is 50, and 26 and 27. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So can you tell me why you're not floating a larger amount into the TECP versus, I know there's a max and the city has approved, what, 300 something million?
350 is the max. What what we try to maximize that, and it's all an estimate right now, but we have a financial model that helps us estimate that. It's different than this financial model, but we go through and look at it on a monthly basis. So each month we go through and look, anytime we make significant changes to the forecast, we go through that model, we look at the monthly ending cash balances. If a cash balance is starting to get close, if it's, I'll say $50 million or less, we look at popping in some TECP, and we try to minimize the overall borrowings. So really, the question on that, it gets to timing. So in 2026 or 2025, we were getting close at some point during that year. We put in the 50 million to make sure that we maintain cash balances. That's really what pushed in then the 45.7 in 2026 bond proceeds. If you take that 45.7 plus the premium, that totals 50. That basically is to repay the prior year TECP. The TECP has to be refunded within 12 months.
And I see Nate there, so Nate would appreciate this comment. I'm also looking at this chart that's been put in our folder, and I'm looking at the project contingency unallocated. And I see that that amount all the way to the end is a total of 223, 359. So I assume since we're at 221 now, that when we're at 223, that somewhere along the line, we're getting more unallocated contingencies dropping into the unallocated column. Is that correct?
So I do expect that, but I'm not sure that that's what this number represents. I think it's just a $2 million fat finger. It should match what's in the progress report. It should be that 221 number, I think, as you stated.
Yeah, so there is no change throughout this duration of the project for an unallocated contingency?
Not in this model.
So that model just keeps unallocated at basically 221?
Current number and spreads it linearly, just even distribution per year in some of our higher spending years.
So if I were to ask you, do you believe that you'll have an increase in unallocated contingency? Because I assume that, well, when AGS and whatever else, the monies was, I call it dropping, sorry, to the unallocated column, basically. Do you expect that we will have allocated contingencies that are not used, that are going to drop into the unallocated column during the project?
So I expect throughout the next year, this year we committed to coming to the board with the D-scope change order for CCUR downtown. That's going to add some money into the unallocated bucket. And then everything is dependent on that CCGS award. Once that's awarded, we'll have a better idea. And I say that because if it comes in 200 over, there goes our unallocated. If it comes in 100 under, we can add 100 to unallocated. But I do expect over the next year, you'll see CCUR downtown with a D-scope change order that will add money to unallocated. And then once we are able to award another professional services contract, I expect that will add some money there too. But that's not what this number is trying to represent. This is just taking what we currently have in unallocated and spreading it evenly across those heavy years.
So I don't want you to give anything away because CCGS is not technically bid out yet, but isn't part of the amount, don't we assume an unallocated contingency as well?
If you look from the FTA's perspective,
Right.
They're saying that you're going to spend everything. They expect you to spend all of unallocated, yes. From the project perspective, we're going to try not to, of course, but it just so much largely depends on that CCGS bid that comes in a year.
About a year away.
That is a year away, yes.
The actual getting the bids or putting it out to bid?
Getting the bids, receiving them, and then executing the contract. If it comes in right at, our estimate of 1.1 or 1.3 billion, we're okay. There's no impact there. But if it's plus or minus, obviously that will probably come from unallocated.
let me ask this technical question, which is, you know, a lot of times the people who create the budget or look at the budget and the people who expend the money, they don't quite talk to each other. You know, it takes a while for each one to catch up. So when this was created for the board, what is your role as the person who actually is, monitoring the contract and knows what's been out there in terms of amount that was let for the contract, how much has been expended? How do you guys interface?
Gotcha. Good question. So, my role, which is outside of like the finance and accounting role, more on the operations side, my role on this report is essentially the cash projections. So at each of the CPP levels, does it make sense per year what we're projecting for costs? And then the ending balance there, the estimate at completion, so the far right column, making sure those two align with what our estimate at completion is. So basically, we use the project schedule to project all these costs, feed them to our finance and accounting group. Finance and accounting looks on, the cash basis, looks for the funding and financing opportunities, and then also recently pulled all the contract value information.
So whose responsibility is it to come up with the EAC?
That was project controls, and the EAC won't change, unless something terrible happens, either bad or good. The EAC is set with the recovery plan at the 9.1 billion project cost, and then the 9.8 all-in cost. And the reason it doesn't change is because contingency gets drained down, right? So contingency goes down, and the EAC is really just forecast plus contingency. So unless something goes terribly wrong or good, it's gonna remain 9.1 for at least several years till we award contract, until we get closer to the end and we know what we're gonna end up at. But I don't expect that. If we're successful, that 9.1 won't ever change till 2031 and we open.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? I just want to clarify one thing you said earlier with respect to CCUR 3 and the descoping. What you said was when you descope CCUR 3 later on, you would move that money into unallocated contingency.
We could.
No.
I think that's, go ahead.
Okay, no, go ahead.
No, so I was just, in normal cases, and I think this is where you're going with it, Robert, is you would return that back to allocated contingency because the CPP is still active.
That's normally best practice.
That is normally, best practice, we can call it that. In this situation, I think we'll be, at the end of this year, about 50% complete with the contract, and I wouldn't see, barring any major hiccups, that we would need all of that contingency. I think it would be up to you guys' concurrence that it would make sense for the project to move that to unallocated. I can't see a world where we would need that money after this descope gets all approved and everything.
Does the opinion or the PMOC makes any difference at all? It seems like they may look at it as, you're just constantly messing with allocated and unallocated. I just want to see what their approach is with respect to what you just said.
Absolutely. I think they probably watch these, so of course it matters what they think. No, but really they will provide that concurrence. But from PMOC and FTA's perspective, it's all about guideway and stations. So any realistic money that we can free up to be able to enable that award, they would be in favor of.
Okay. Go ahead. Thank you, Nate, and thanks, Rick, for adding the column, the contract value. It does give some context into, a benchmark to total expenses. Sorry, Natalie. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Question on procedure. So I was looking at the state tax reports last night, and I'm just wondering, does anybody at heart ever go back to those reports and just to confirm that the amounts that we received for the transit fund are correct for GET or TAT?
We do look at that periodically. It's not just a simple calculation, but we do look at that and we do talk to them on a regular basis.
Okay, yeah, because I know sometimes they're way far behind, but at least on an annual basis, that is something that I think should be done. And then the other thing was I wanted to ask that new bond repayment schedule, if the committee can have a copy of that once you guys finalize. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Turning the focus from expenses to revenue on the annual cash flow. Are you looking at, your forecast of state TAT given to what happened, to Maui?
Well, we've considered it. I mean, that was a terrible thing that happened on Maui, but it's really too early to know what kind of impact that's going to have. Right now, we have not changed anything in our forecast related to that. We looked at it a few years ago, or a year and a half or so ago, when the city TAT was getting implemented, and we looked at the composition of the statewide TAT by county, and Maui County was about 30%, if I recall, of that number. So just on the surface, there could be an impact, but we don't know how prolonged it's going to be. We don't know whether that's going to be distributed differently. I mean, some of the tourism that would have gone to Maui may go to another island. So right now it's really too early to say. So we haven't changed anything, and we'll just continue to monitor. We have heard from the state. I mean, Natalie just mentioned we communicate with the state and look at their numbers. We did hear from one of the economic people at the state recently saying that they were not expecting a huge impact on an overall statewide basis. So we're just going to continue to monitor it right now.
Okay, yeah, it's not something that we're asking you to do. It's just something to be aware of. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead if you want to go through the monthly one.
Yeah, the final 2 pages of the report that's in the package is the 15-month forecast. For I guess now it's a 12-month forecast and a 3-month historical. Not a whole lot more to add to this. The debt situation, the bond proceeds, bond issuance in August have been reflected similar to what's in the monthly one or the annual one that we just talked about. I do want to point out there is a mistake in here that we should have caught before this went out. In the July actual on the cost side, in account 201 down toward the bottom, our operational expenses, there was a large number popped into that bucket, and it should have been allocated out amongst other categories, and it wasn't. That was supposed to have been done before the report went out, and it did not happen.
Yeah.
It shows 11.5 million in operating costs, which is not accurate. That will get corrected. In fact, it has been corrected in the subsequent version internally. Most of that 11 million should have been allocated up to the CCUR category, which makes sense. Right now, there's 2 million sitting in CCUR. That number should have been about 8. And then another 1.8 or so should have been in the AGS category. So we're going to make those corrections. So apologies for not catching that before it went out the door last week. On the couple of things on the funding side, out in June 2024, we show the 12 million city subsidy. That's generally when we receive those amounts. We receive the 23 amount in June, right before the end of the fiscal year. But we did go ahead and receive from the city that 12 million just this week. So we'll be moving that 12 million up. It'll be an August or a July, an August actual number. So we'll make that change for next time. So that's good news. And then the last thing I want to mention on this is there's a lot of noise in the GET and TAT numbers. If you look at this, generally it's one amount per quarter, but it's kind of jumbled up right now. There are some issues on the state side relative to their budget appropriations in these accounts. And so in the fourth quarter, instead of giving us our full payment, they withheld a little over 20 million of it. So we received roughly 79, 80 million in GET in May, and then they made up the difference that was due to us in July. So you see a 209,000 number in GET and a 21 million number in TAT in July. That really relates to the fourth quarter, but we didn't get it paid until the first quarter of the new fiscal year. And then in the current quarter, you see 72 million in August that's budgeted or forecasted. And then you see in October, another 8 million of GET and 20 million of TAT. Those are all related to the payments that we should be receiving in the first quarter. So we've been working with the state trying to get this resolved. It's really the budgeting issue on the state side. We're not at risk of not receiving any of the funds that are due to us, but the timing on it has been kind of screwy lately. They have, I don't want to say assured us, but they have told us that beginning in second quarter, once they get first quarter trued up, we shouldn't have a problem going forward. They're making corrections on their end, but we're going to continue to monitor that. But if you just look at this, it looks a little more messy than normal because usually it's pretty clean, one number per quarter. It's a little messy, but that's why. It's just stateside budget appropriation caps that they have in place. Aside from that, I didn't have any additional comments on the monthly unless there are questions.
Any questions from members? Roger?
There was at one point, there were invoices that were held by DAGs because they weren't deemed to be, are you guys are keeping a running tally of those? And what is the level?
The current amount, but those constantly churn. And so, yeah, they have more invoices than what they have GET and TAT to pay us. So they have a backlog.
Any practical differences, and then ultimately there'll be a resolution of the
backlog,
invoices.
and then there's some that they kick back in dispute. Oftentimes, it's just a matter of they have a question, and we answer their question.
So if we do have an accumulation of invoices for which they determine are not capital expenses, for example, won't we eventually run into a cash problem in the? Well, I mean, where
not necessarily, because based on the historic nature of these, they haven't been that significant. And if we do have one thing that will protect us on that going forward. We do have the city TAT, which is less restrictive, I'll say. So if we do get to that situation, we do still have funding to cover. But we've been able to resolve almost everything with them. And new ones pop in and old ones get cleaned out. So it's kind of a churn. But oftentimes it's just a matter of providing additional documentation or answering some questions.
Yeah, just to clarify, the last report I saw with respect to revenues collected and revenue payout, it is a very small balance. So, yeah, it seems like everything that we submit and the money that comes in for those submittals have been approved and paid. Any other questions from Natalie?
Yeah, thank you. So you caught the two things that I was going to ask about, but I'm just wondering on these issues with the GET. So they've already told you that the GET for this quarter is going to be delayed partially.
Yes.
And so I don't know if there's anything that can be done to change that, but it seems like, the money is there. It's not the state's money, really. And so it seems like it should just be paid out. It shouldn't be subject to these appropriations. And I don't know, who probably knows it's better, but is that just like, is there any way to change that?
Yeah, we haven't. That's why going forward, they don't anticipate a problem in the latter quarters because they are working on a fix right now. They weren't even aware of the issue until we raised it with them. And so now they're looking into it and going to try to put a fix in place.
Okay, so I thought before that it was like a legal thing where they can only give out X amount per month. Is that, maybe I misunderstand what the problem is.
My understanding is the problem is that they have a budget appropriation on the payments through this fund, and it's gotten capped out. They haven't changed their budget appropriation for this for the last 2 or 3 years. They've just been letting it ride, even though GT and TAT has been growing each year. So we bumped up against the cap. So that's what happened in the fourth quarter, and the same thing in the first quarter. But they're putting in a change to that after we brought it to their attention, and they've told us that they will have it fixed for the remainder of the year.
Okay, so that's something internal within the department of whomever
Yes.
gives Hart the money.
No.
It's not something that has to go to legislators or anything like that. Okay, great.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
I just want to clarify the appropriation ceiling it is part of the biannual budget, and it has to go through the legislature
I don't know what change they're putting in place, and maybe it does.
for
I'm
a
not sure,
supplemental
but
budget.
They
Yes.
assured us after we brought this to their attention, they're trying to get it fixed. However, that has to happen.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's another law, but generally, to change the appropriation ceiling, you have to go through the legislature. It's part of the budgeting process. Roger.
One final question. How long has it been since we submitted our recovery plans? About a year now.
We submitted it in June of last year.
And in that recovery plan, we made assumptions about revenue forecasts. Over the last year, where do we stand relative to the forecast we had in the recovery plan?
We're positive. That's what I mentioned a few minutes ago when Chair was asking about the difference in the cash balance. I want to say there's a 40 to 50 million. I can't remember the amount. Actually, in the last Finance Committee meeting, if you still have your information from that, there was a table reconciling that, showing the comparison between actual receipts versus the recovery plan. I want to say it's about a 40 to 50 million dollar positive variance so far.
That's good.
Yeah, Rick, I know you guys have a report on, actual versus what was forecast. I think maybe in the next finance committee meeting, if that could be just included as part of the discussion, that would be good. Natalie?
Yeah, I was just going to basically mention the same thing, that there was, I think it's about 47 million. And so in addition to that change now that's been put into the projections here, are we going to be expecting that change to be in the amended full funding grant agreement as well? So that
I'm sorry, which change?
the increase in the GET and TAT collections?
No, they've asked us to keep everything as much as possible consistent with the recovery plan.
Okay, so the financial plan that is going to be in the amended full fund FFGA will be the same as that was in the recovery plan.
For the most part, the cost side will be the same. The full funding grant agreement, the way the dollars work out is, per our discussion earlier, there was $120 million surplus anticipated in the recovery plan at the end of the project. In the full funding grant agreement, it washes out pretty much to zero. So we're not showing a surplus. So we have reduced in that document some of the funding that we're anticipating, because the funding there is intended to cover the cost and not show a surplus. So we have reduced, actually, not added to, but we've actually reduced some of the local funding source in that document so that it nets to zero.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Question?
Yeah, Chair.
I understand that you're doing that, but what is the reality?
The reality is it's going to be positive. This is the reality.
Right.
But in
Right.
that document, it needs to net down to zero. So we're looking at the federal funds and then how much local funds are needed then to get it to cover the cost, basically.
And this is an FDA request that we
Yes.
actually, in other words, we file a false document? Because it's false. I mean, we know it's not true. We know that
Well,
the income is a lot more
that
than that.
document gets, I think it intends to, the purpose of that is it gets to the percentage of FDA coverage of costs. And so it basically just looks at, here's what your total costs are anticipated to be. Where's the funding coming for those costs? Here's federal funds, and here's how much local funds it takes to cover the cost, and then there's a percentage of each. It doesn't get into a surplus situation. But in reality,
It's
and with
got
the
to
recovery,
equal, it's got to zero out, in
Yes.
other words. So in other words, the FDA portion has got to be 1.55 no matter what, and
right,
our
it's-
match is whatever it is, right?
It's the 1.55 plus the 70 plus the 64. That's the federal piece. And then the difference between that and
Oh, and don't forget our 4 million from
EAC.
ARRA and
Right,
all
right,
of that, right?
So all those together, and then that subtracted from the 9148 EAC, that's the local funding that you need to put in the
And
policy.
even if our local funding is a lot more,
Right.
because it's probably gonna end up a lot more than 9.1. All right, that's what I thought you were saying. I said, why would we do that? But, okay, that's the way they want it.
Go ahead now.
I'm sorry, just one more question, kind of following up on what I had asked at the last meeting, which apparently wasn't heard on the broadcast, but I had taken the accounts receivable and basically backed them out from the audit report, and theoretically that should give us the cash received for GET and TAT on the cash flow projections, and they didn't match. I forget what the difference was, but somebody is going to be following up with the auditor on that. The other question I had was regarding the bond repayments, and I think now that that has been corrected, I think the 60,000, I understand is not material, but it goes to integrity of these schedules. That I believe was related to the bond proceeds that were corrected, the 60,000 in the current cash flow. The correction was made. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as I didn't want to leave that hanging and kind of close those items up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you had several questions last month on the bonds, and I responded to all of them. That was one of them, and I responded to your others. Hopefully my answers on those were satisfactory to you as well. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Chair.
You know, and this is to Cindy. I think it's with the board meeting that we're supposed to have a section now that talks about requests and where we are. So Natalie, all your requests, can you just be sure that Cindy gets them? Because we now have a section in the board agenda that's going to talk about unresolved, did we call it unresolved issues or something like that? I forgot the title that we gave it. But we're going to follow up, and I think it's important for us to have whoever feels that they asked the question or asked for a follow-up and it didn't get done or it should be done, please be sure Cindy gets that information and it'll be on the agenda. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any other questions for Ray on this agenda item? Okay, hearing none, this is not this item doesn't require action. Cindy, should I call formal public testimony if there is? Yeah, so if there are any public testimony, thanks, Ray, on this item. None. Okay, thank you. We'll move to the next item. Fiscal year 2025 preliminary budget development discussion. Lori and Brent, please. Thank you.
For the record, Lori Kakikina, CEO and Executive Director of HART, and then I have Brent Lewis, my Deputy of Finance with me to go through the presentation. So the second slide. So this is a preliminary operating capital budget that we are presenting to you folks, and it will be an iterative process, and the intent is to get this over to City Council and the Mayor's office by December 1st. But just to start, our proposed preliminary operating expenditure, we're asking for $138.6 million, and for our capital, $574. And we anticipate the projects that we're going to put out, the new contracts is the City Center Guideway and Stations, the Waipahu Station, Mackay Entrance, and this one, you folks have heard this before, dynamic voltage compensator, we've changed it. It was called StatComs before, where you look on the cash flow. We changed it because StatComs is very limited to the technology. This is really, we're broadening it because we understand there's different technologies that can accomplish what we need to have done. And as I mentioned before, this is going to be iterative, and we want to get everything done and approved by you folks so we can get it over to the Mayor and City Council by December 1st. On the next slide, so there is a $29.4 million increase. That's about 27% over FY24. The majority of that is because of the $29.1 million that we're paying in principal on our bonds. We started last year, our FY '23 to BFS, but this is a continuation. The major decrease, and we've been having preliminary discussions with Chair of the Finance, Robert Yu, the lower budget on the salaries. There's two reasons for that. We're looking at how we're allocating, capitalizing the salaries, and also a reduced number of FTEs. So I was pretty ambitious last year on how many positions we wanted to fill, and so I brought it down dramatically. So that's a reason why it's a little alarming when you look at the salary reduction line item, which we'll go through in the next couple of slides. So on the next slide, currently as of August 25th, we have 43. This is just city HART employees. We have consultants that are embedded with us. We're asking to fill 29 positions. Again, that's still ambitious too, but we didn't want to cut ourselves short in case we do a really good job at recruiting. The other thing that we're proposing is to reduce the amount of authorized positions. Right now, I believe we have 135. We would like to reduce that to 98. Of course, board has to approve that. And the way we're capitalizing our salaries, 6.7 FTEs on the operating and 65.3 on the capital. So we've made some adjustments on the individual positions, and that's why also the salaries went down. So if you look at the next slide on the table, again, I know it's dramatic. FY '24 for salaries, we looked at 2 million and it's down by 1.1 million, down to 907. So again, some preliminary discussions with the chair, the finance chair, and he's accurate. When we looked at a similar department, E&V, they capitalized 90% of their salaries for one of their divisions. 10% is operating, 90% is capital. And we have not put it on our capital as a line item. So for example, E&V, they call it project management for the design and construction of the wastewater project. So for us, we need to add in project management for the HART project, and that's where the salaries will be captured and obtain board approval. We've added in a couple of things, again, with preliminary discussions with the finance chair. So the next line is board labor costs. So these numbers, the 253,000 was prior, it was embedded into our HART's budget, but we've split that out. HART's current expenses went up from about 1.5, it's kind of stayed the same, so increased about 28,000. But then the next one is board expense. We pulled out the 250,000 is the internal audit, and then we're being told that the HART board would like to increase it to 514. So there's still the 250 for the internal audit, and then on top of that, an additional so 264,000 total. And the next line is our city charges. So the subtotal, 5.6 last year to 4.8 this year. Our debt service, as I mentioned on the previous slides, increased by $30 million due to our repaying of the principal. So total, our budget has increased about 27% over FY '24. The next slide breaks down the salaries a little bit more. So again, the HART salaries are on the top line, board salaries are below, and then the fringe benefits is tied directly to the salary. So that's just a percentage right there. And then OPEB, we get the cost from BFS, right? They tell us. The state. Sorry, my mistake. So again, that's just a number that's tied to the salary. So we broke it up by HART salaries and the board salaries. And then the next slide breaks down the bigger line items on the current expense. We didn't want to put every little thing, although in your presentation on the final slide, it does break out the proposed FY '25 budget. It has every single category in there, but just wanted to highlight some of the bigger ones. So our rent is increasing by about 4%, 48,000. Professional services actually went down. And here's where we broke out the board professional services. I didn't get clear guidance, so I took a guess at where to put the numbers, because you have to put it in some kind of a line item. So I put professional services, 140, but of course that's up to you folks where you want to put the fundings. Our auditing services, well, we went down. Are we capitalizing part of our, okay, so that's why the big decrease from 128,000 down to 80,000. We've capitalized our external financial audit. And then the board auditing numbers stayed the same. Communications kind of stayed the same from 53,000, 62,000. This is another one that I took a guess at, board communication. So again, it's up to you folks where you want to put the funds. And then this last line item, all others, because I didn't want to go through all 30 line items, which you have in your back document. On the next slide, we have our case reimbursement and city reimbursement that we owe to the city. Again, this is just based off a calculation of our operating costs. So that pretty much stayed flat as well. And then the next slide, this is our bond debt service. So on the first few lines, you can see that is our interest payments on the different bond series. Under that is our principal payments on the bond series, and then you have the TECP and BFS funds. So one thing I would like to bring your attention to, so that second one, this is what Rick was talking about in his presentation, the interest on bond series 2019E. So we have 176 million current outstanding. It's zero. That's the amount that maybe refinance is a better term. So that's why you see FY25, the interest is zero on that. But and then it's tied down to the principal payment. If you go down a few lines, the 2019E is there. So that replaced the one above. I hope I'm making that. Hoping I'm making that clear for everyone. And again, that 30 million change is what I was referring to earlier. That's our bond principal repayments. This next slide just categorizes where all of our funding is coming from. So we're estimating about 329 million in GET, 82 million from TAT, and the OTAT 48 million. Now the federal funding, that $250 million, that is tied to the award of the city CCGS contract. So if, Nate spoke earlier, we're estimating that we're going to award that contract next year, about summertime. So that's why we fall into the FY25 budget year, that it'll take several months to get the funding from FTA. The city subsidy, it is $10 million. And then the TECP, we're estimating that we're going to need 50 million, which Rick talked to in the cash flows. Other revenue is about $6 million. Now, this is a new line item, unreserved fund balance of the $496 million. So we had that. You folks approved that in our last year's budget. And because we didn't award the CCGS, we wanted to show this because when we put out the CCGS contract, it's going to be a multi-term funding mechanism. So we wanted to make it clear that we don't have to have the full 1.1 billion to award that contract. It's going to be multi-term. So total, what we're estimating is $1.3 billion. And then the last slide just shows where the funds is going to go. The 574, what we're proposing in our capital, go to CCGS, the Waipahu Station, Mackay entrance, and that dynamic voltage compensator. But as I brought up earlier, as discussion with the finance chair, we need to add a line item for the capitalization of salaries. Chair, that concludes my presentation, and we're open to questions and comments.
Lori. Questions? Board members? Natalie, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Laurie. So with respect to this capitalization of the salaries, I don't know, you may recall that a few years ago it was changed because quite a lot of the salaries, I don't know, it might have even been all of the salaries were expensed. And I was a bit surprised by that because under generally accepted accounting principles, when you're building an asset, all of the costs, pretty much without exception, are supposed to be capitalized. So then a few years ago, that percentage was changed, and now you're proposing to change it again, it sounds like.
So actually, Rick and I agree with you that almost everything should be capitalized. I don't know if Rick's willing to come up and give some history, because when he was on the other side working with the then BFS director, it changed to capitalize some of the positions. And what I'm trying to do is go back to that to make it more capitalized than operating. Do you want to give some context, Rick, on that?
Yeah, kind of historically on this, I agree that given the fact that this organization exists solely to build a capital project, I think you could argue that everything should be capitalized. I was retired for a while, and then I was called by Mayor Caldwell to come join his team. And one of the first things that Nelson, who was the previous BFS director, talked to me about is, why does Hart have $21 million a year in operating costs? They're not capitalizing it. That's a capital project. Why isn't more being capitalized? So Nelson and I, and Robert was here at the time, and Robert was involved in some of these discussions as well, but we met with members of the board, we met with the external audit firm, et cetera, and kind of came up with kind of a transitional plan. You know, I think everybody kind of agreed that most everything should be capitalized. So we put together a new updated capitalization policy. Some of the things that we left on the operating side, for example, would be board support. We looked at it and said, okay, if this was let's say a city department or a standalone project, there probably wouldn't be in this, like we have here, a board and board support. So that's one of the things that is still 100% in the operating budget. And then we looked at other positions and said, okay, most of those positions are related to the project, but there may be some other things. So Lori's salary, for example, I think is 90% capital, 10% admin. And all the positions were looked at. And periodically we've looked at it since then to true those up a little bit. This year we looked at it again. I hadn't looked at it for quite some time, but a lot of our people were, like, for example, even accounts payable was 10% capital, 90% operating. When if you think about their job and how does that relate to the project, they're critical to making sure payments get made to the contractors. And of the invoices that they process, most of them are capital. So I think the argument could easily be made, instead of 10% operating and 90%, or 10% operating, no, 10% capital, 90% operating, it should be the opposite. So we went through and just looked at a lot of the positions this year and made some changes. Some were 60-40 instead of 40-60, and we just went through and trued a lot of them up. I think it makes sense. And I think we're still actually being conservative in the amount that we're capitalizing, because I actually think more could be capitalized, but it's been kind of transitional.
So, sorry, Natalie. So what I want to do is I want to put some context into what Rick just said. Back in 2017, the legislature passed Act 1 to extend GET to 2030 from 2025, and also to add statewide TAT as part of the funding source. And one of the features of Act 1 is that that money could be only used for capital expenditures, not administrative and operating. And operating in that context, in the context of Act 1, is really operating and maintenance to run the rail. Administrative is the administrative portion of the hard board budget. So Nelson and I got together and thought, well, what portion of the administrative budget could be considered capital so that it would be eligible to be reimbursed under Act 1? So in that context, that's how the allocation started. It was not initially used as a budget matter because Act 1 doesn't really care about the budget. It cares about what could be subject to reimbursement, capital and operating. So we designed the allocation with that in mind. And what we also did was, after we finished the allocation and after we documented all the reasons why we did the allocation the way it came out to, the external auditor at that time had to audit it and approved it. So I guess my question is, with all these changes you all do annually, is the external auditor looking at that to make sure that is appropriate? Okay,
Yeah, and we haven't made changes annually. It may have changed once or twice since the time you were here.
okay,
But
yes, so,
But
yeah,
yes,
so-
they do look at those.
right. So in the context, we could approve a budget with, a certain portion of the salary or whatever in the capital part of the budget and others in the operating part of the budget. From that standpoint, it really didn't matter with respect to that. It's all because of Act One and the eligibility of reimbursement. Sorry, I kind of hijacked your
It's okay,
questions.
that's good to have a little more history. So, I guess my, suggestion to you folks then is to make this the last time, because it's very difficult to go, when you go back 5 years and you're looking at operating salaries, and then you're like, or even like the audit, I'm like, why is the audit cost fluctuating like this? Just doesn't make sense. So from a historical perspective, it's difficult to make comparisons like that. And then it's also, if I were an auditor, I would be concerned that you're changing your policy several times and you haven't changed anything with respect to what you're doing. It's just that you're trying to work with these numbers and figure out maybe what makes sense. But the other comment I wanted to make, and I guess I don't want to get too deep into this, is that Act One and that restriction, I have asked about that so many times. And honestly, I still don't understand now you have the city TAT, which is not restricted, but in the past, I couldn't figure out where you were getting the funds from to pay those operating salaries. And hopefully that whole issue is behind us and nobody has ever said anything and we're all good with respect to that.
Well, we did have a bucket of pre-Act One money that wasn't restricted that we've been using to pay the operating costs. That was the bucket that was being used.
Okay, so that's different from what I was told a few years ago, but like I said, nobody has ever said anything that I'm aware of, and hopefully all that is good. So thank you.
Oh, sure.
Robert and I were probably the only ones who are on this table who did Act One. And I think that I can explain the intent of Act One was not to pay any administrative costs. And the position of the legislature at that time was the city should have some skin in this game and they should pay for administrative costs. And they were looking at administrative costs very broadly. I understand what Robert and Nelson may have done in terms of capital, but they wanted it very clear when we did Act One that operations and maintenance never gets covered with the GET or the TAT. They did come up with this unique thing about pre-Act One monies, which I don't know how they did that, because I think if somebody went into the legislative history, I think I'm the only one who was there in 2007, we didn't want any operations and maintenance. We weren't clear enough, but if you were to go back to what the arguments were, we didn't want any operations and maintenance covered by the GET at that time. And in Act One, you have TAT coming in. The reason was very simple. The legislature did not trust the city. And you can see that with the fact, remember, it was a 10% cushion. And it was in Act One that they gave up the 10% and went down to 1%. But that was all because they wanted to monitor exactly what the city was doing. Because when that TAT, GET, and the whole, I forget the number, I can find it very easily, passed, it was because of the fact that there were so many representations made to the legislature as to what would be covered and what would not be covered. So Robert is very well aware of that because he was the one who was on the Hart side working with us when we did Act One. Having said that, however, I will tell you that the whole issue of capital and operational costs, usually the capital issue comes in what monies can be used by bonding. We had to go through this with DAGs in particular and the state side as to what engineers is really what it came down to. We could put on the capital side and cover their expenses versus having to general fund them. Because the natural reaction is that we would general fund their employees. They should be general funded. But there's this interesting thing that people say, well, we'll call it capital. But when you go into the capital, normally it involves bond financing. Nobody has the kind of financing that Hart has, which is the GET monies coming in. If you look even at big city projects, it's all bond financing. You don't have that kind of income. And therefore, the issue of capital and what can be covered becomes critical in understanding the bond financing. What is it the bond council will say, you're kind of pushing it at that point. You can't have everybody be covered by bond because that's not going to be acceptable, because they're not just doing one specific project, because that's not the way they work. So I think the issue of capital versus operational may not be the same in terms of Hart, because Hart is GET and TAT funded. You have the short-term bond financing, but that's why I always talk about commercial paper, because that eliminates any kind of argument about whether or not this is proper use of bond financing. Commercial paper is different, but that's why I think that it may not be the same thing. And when we allocate between capital and we allocate between capital and operational costs, when all the money is technically cash, it doesn't make sense. Capital makes sense when you're doing bond financing and what the bond council will allow you to do with that money, because it's bond money. And bond money is different than basically general fund money. You can do whatever you want with general fund money. What Hart receives is equivalent, in my opinion, to general fund money. GET, TAT, it's cash. And even the federal money is a grant, but it's cash. It's not the bond funding. Because the reason why I believe that putting engineers on the project, yes, we can argue it, but it's because that bond, whatever results from that bond, is supposed to last for the duration of their bond. And when they do engineering or whatever, it's for a period of time. It's not for the whole damn project, which is bond financed. But I understand what you are trying to do with this. I'm not sure that I see the need for that distinction, but maybe that's something we can ask for a legal opinion on. I know what you guys were thinking about because of the administrative and the no operations and maintenance and so forth and capital. And by calling it capital, to me, it isn't really what was intended when you look at how you fund people's positions when you're folding bonds. Anyway, having said that, the one thing I am curious about, Laurie, is you have 43 Hart employees as of August 25, 2023, correct?
Yes.
It seems to be a number that keeps declining every month, right? So are we at 43 as we sit here today?
Yes.
We're at 43. Positions to be filled are 29, and also and we, the board has just Cindy, so I can tell you that from what we need or what we think we need, we don't have anything. We have one person. And then you have this operating budget and capital budget, and then we just went through that. So you're saying 65.3%, 65.3 FTEs versus 6.7 FTEs, correct? Now, how does that then jive with 43 positions?
It's the 43 plus the 29, right? Okay. So it
Is
would
that
be,
what that is?
yeah, sorry, Chair.
72 positions is what that comes out to.
Chair, yes.
So what you're accounting for in here is the positions that you haven't filled yet, that you're going to say somehow between 43 and 29.
It would be, yes, that's 70. How we're allocating the operating and the capital, it would be with the assumption we have 43 right now, and if we can be successful enough to fill the 29 in FY25, it would total the 72.
So that's what okay, that's what you intend to
Yes.
do. So how are you allocating those positions between capital and operating? Because, we asked for an org chart. Maybe what you need to do is give us another org
We
chart.
can give you a spreadsheet, exactly what we're having the conversation here of all of the positions, so maybe the 98, because I would like your folks' approval to bring us down. Or we can do the whole 135, and this is what we allocated, like Rick said, like, for example, for myself, I'm 90% capital, 10% operating, and it totals all the way up to the end, and it can show you how we got this number, 65.3 and 6.7, just for the 43 and 29 total. But we can do that.
Okay, why don't we? Go
I
ahead.
apologize, Chair. There's a moment of worldwide silence for Maui at 12 o'clock, so it's 12 o'clock,
Okay.
and we would like to observe it. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So the operating budget summary that you have, you're saying the overall increase of 29.1 is accounted for from the 29.4. That's so the overall increase of principal payments on the doubting basically the GO bonds. So the GO bonds are coming out of operating expense. Is that correct? The payments. And the labor costs decreased, lowered the budgeted FTE. But like I said, this is just basically you're just shifting from one bucket to the other bucket, right?
And I'm reducing, so I think last year I might have been in the 90, requesting 90 total salaries. We're down to 72.
Well, yeah, well, you, I think we authorized you were at 135
Yeah.
and then you went to about 98 or something like that. And now you're really 43 as of August. And you said you anticipate filling another 29.
Yes, I think last year I was more ambitious. I probably had about 40 or 50 positions to fill. So I dropped that down, and then the next step will be to, maybe it's at the HR committee first, to drop the 135 down to the 98, because I've heard you folks have brought this up numerous times. Do we really need the 135 positions? And okay, let's say we cut it down to 98, and okay, I cut too much. We can always put it back with board's approval to put back the positions. But I honestly don't see us filling 135 positions.
I don't even know if you're going to fill the 98.
Correct.
So I mean, I think that's really, so the other thing I'd like to have the HDR positions or anybody else's, we call them HDR only because that's what we all think about. But if you're operating hard with 43 positions, you're not operating hard with 43 positions. You're backstopped by a lot of the private contractors. I'd like to know what that is because Lori, they cost us a lot of money. And we're paying a premium to a company like HDR. I think one example that I was given was, we may pay $1 million for somebody. The person may get $450,000, but the rest goes to HDR. So, I'd like to know what those figures are and where we are and who's on there and who's being covered by that. Beside, we know Krista is, but other than Krista. Now you have also on the, and you have this huge huge reduction in labor costs, but it's not really, it's a reduction on paper, right? Because if you're filling it, you gotta show us a cost someplace else.
That's
So,
to
yeah, right.
Robert's point that what we are missing, what Hart has always been missing apparently is when you look at the capital budget, we only list the new construction projects that we're asking for appropriation
Right.
for. There, we need to add a line item. So if you look at slide 11, FY25 capital budget, we break out by the projects. We need to have a line item there that says, project management for Hart project. And basically that's where the line item of the salaries needs to be on the capital side. So yeah, we're not only doing $908,000 for salaries, it's 908 plus percentage on the capital side. So we will definitely add that in.
Yeah, and Lori, I think it's good if you also break out, the 574 million, right? Between the
Sure.
categories instead of lumping
Yes.
it. And I think for discussion purposes, it would be helpful for me at the next finance committee meeting, the breakdown of the 569 million that the board approved last year. And if you could submit that to us, when you have it, please, for fiscal year 24. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's okay. You should start writing this down because they should be part of your to be done things so that we don't forget it. So I guess and that's really what's confusing about this. I mean, you're shifting the pot of money, so to speak. It's the same pot of money, but you're shifting. It's like those hot pots that's sort of divided in two. So you have the operating and you have the capital. So we need to, if it's not being expended out of operating, it's being expended under capital. So we need to know that, and we need to know how much it is. So up until now, then, if we haven't done this in the past, then you've just put this through as administrative costs is that how it was working? Did you see it when you were at the state, how they divided up the two?
No, we don't see it. It's DAGs, the auditors, that sees it. And they would only see it if Hart submits that for them to review. If they don't, then that's not going to be reimbursed.
But they have to get it reimbursed. They got to submit it.
Yes, but I think, the other thing of Act 1 is it has the city subsidy, right?
Right.
So because the city subsidy kind of covered most of the administrative expenses.
I think the city subsidy had restrictions too. You cannot use operating, it has to be only capital. So that's why the OTAT is actually saving us, because the pot of money of the pre-Act 1 it's running out. It was almost empty. So OTAT
I was
came
going to
just in
say
time.
it's only conveniently called pre-act one, but,
right.
because if it depends on how you do accounting, right? If it's first in, first out, or whatever it is, it would have been all gone. So you can call it whatever you want, but you got to get to the point where it's something that everyone eventually has to agree to, that this is what's happening.
Yeah, I think the control was the external auditor auditing the percentages and agreeing to it. That was the control, at least when we were there. I don't know whether the external auditor audited this allocation or not yet.
No, not yet. We're going
Yeah.
through the process right now with them. Yes.
So we have to be sure that it's something that's acceptable.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I think somebody else. Thank you very much.
So I understand this allocation. I'm looking at the office and equipment rent of 1.127 million or something. I know that's not the rent we're paying for Ali'i. So is that also the type of expense that's allocated between capital and operating? I mean, I'm assuming your rent's more than $1 million a year.
Right, that's capitalized, so, that's predominantly rent.
So rent is capitalized too. So okay. I mean, just so I understand what the operating budget means, and does seem a little arbitrary to me, the way some of the allocations are done. You had mentioned, Laurie, that 90% of environmental department is categorized as capital.
One division because it's all the,
And a lot of that is because of fund source, right? And fund source for that is probably sewer fee and tipping fee.
also, ENV has multiple divisions. That's all they do is wastewater. So all of their funds comes from the wastewater funds, the sewer fees.
All I'm trying to say is there's obviously an incentive for the city to maximize the amount that comes out of a sewer fee, for example, so they minimize the amount that comes out of a general fund.
You can't touch the general funds. For wastewater, there's nothing from the general funds going to wastewater. They are self-sufficient with the wastewater funds. So like the discussion Chair was having, I'm curious we would love to have everything one bucket. It's all
Yeah.
Everything's capital.
And that's kind of where I was
I would
going
love
with
that
it.
if
It seems that we're just really being arbitrary in doing it, and I don't know to what end, what positive end we get by making these distinctions, which frankly make it harder for us to figure out
Yes, and
how
so-
much we're spending on different categories and line items.
Chair's point, you're right. I didn't think about it that way it's tied to the bonds, but we're not doing 30-year bonds like A&V does. Ours is very short term.
I'm
and it's
pretty
gonna
sure
be-
that's where you started to capitalize your engineers. It's the same thing with DAGs. We went through this, and we had bond counsel come in, and we went through this whole thing with DAGs. And so, well, how can you? And the issue with it, because it was a bond, was the idea is whatever is built, whatever goes into building it, is something for the duration of the bond. You don't have a bond here. The only thing is what the legislature intended when it said you will not do operations and maintenance and you will not do administrative. But the idea was the administrative part of it would be covered by the city, not by, because as you know, it's been an issue for me, the 5307 funds, the bus funds were supposed to be part of the financial plan, and the city took it out, but they never replenished it. I will till today say that the city skin in the game is the replenishment of the 5307 funds, which they arbitrarily took out. So, but yeah, that's why I think you're where you are at, and that's why I kept saying, well, I don't understand this, but that's me. So you might want to get an opinion.
Natalie?
So I guess I hadn't thought about this before. What is the annual transfer total?
Total is
About approximately 3 million.
less than 3 million. It's about almost 2.8.
Okay, so, when we're looking at something like this, slide 7 with the comparison of the current year and projected budget, and it shows a $48,000 increase, that's really misleading because we don't know what is on the capital side. So I would like to request, Chair, that that we be given a spreadsheet of, the operating, the capital, and the total cost on these items so that we can really see what is being increased or decreased or changed. Is that?
Maybe something like this table, it's operating only. I'm hoping I'm not making it too difficult for you, Brent, but add a column. So, same line items, but we'll add a column to say what's been capitalized. So
Yeah,
you can see exactly.
I think that would
Okay,
be a good
Yeah, we
idea.
can do that.
Yeah,
okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Any other questions, members, on the draft of the fiscal year 25 budget? Okay, so Brent, just to confirm, the next presentation of the fiscal year 25 budget, you will provide more details to the fiscal year 25 capital budget. And also, you will also provide more details on the fiscal year 24 budget, which is part of page 11 that was approved by the Hart Board.
Referring to the capital.
Yeah, so fiscal year 24 has 569 million. You will give us a breakdown in the presentation, what's included in the 569 million, just like you would on the 574. Okay, thank you. And members, I apologize. I have to leave at pretty much right now. So at this time, I would like to appoint Chair Hanabusa. Yes. As part of the Finance Committee, and Vice Chair Edwin Young will take over the remaining portion of the Finance Committee. That good? Paul, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So I guess the next item on the agenda is taking a look at the capital budget for fiscal year 2024 and the allocation for city center utility relocation for electrical services. Do we need to go into executive session to discuss the item, or can we publicly discuss it?
Chair, this is Cindy. I suggest we do the public presentation first and then make that decision after the public presentation.
Before we break into executive session, is there any public participation or testimony regarding the capital budget? If not, then we will start discussion.
No testimony, Chair.
Okay. Great, then, do we need to go into executive session on that? Under the board may enter into executive session pursuant to Hawaii.
Chair, this is Cindy. I suggest that we do the public presentation by staff prior to asking a question about executive session.
Okay, go ahead. So, we have public discussion.
Yeah, we do not have a public presentation if we are on agenda item 4. It was simply an ask. So basically what we're asking to do is take the fiscal year 24 budget allocation for CCGS and reallocate about 100 million for CCUR for electrical, which went out on the streets last year. So essentially we're not using anything, of course, on CCGS. So it's just taking 100 million from that and reallocating it to CCUR. The reason we're asking for this is because we were originally pursuing CCUR 4E or Dillingham Electrical as a change order with the NAN contract. That we quickly realized that wasn't the most cost-effective option. Then we went out for procurement. I think procurement hit the streets last week. So that's the ask. Apologize for not having a presentation.
Sure. So no executive session is needed. Do we need to pass a resolution allowing the transfer of funds or reallocation of funds? No? Okay. So do we need a motion?
Chair, I think we need discussion amongst members.
Okay. Before we have the discussion, do we need a resolution or a motion? Okay, so we'll start discussion. Any comments? Roger?
Not a motion, it's discussion,
It's
I believe.
discussion.
Discussion on
four.
item number 4.
Edwin, this is Colleen. Can I ask a question or questions?
Sure, please.
So, Nate, if I remember this correctly, this issue came up earlier because we did an amendment to or change order to the CCUR contract for Colucho, correct?
Correct.
But then at that time, there was a discussion that the CCUR contract for the NAN one could not be done by way of a change order, if I remember correctly. And it had something to do with the subcontractor, that you needed a subcontractor and NAN couldn't do it within its own structure. Was that correct? It was something along those lines. There was a reason why we couldn't do a change order to NAN's contract.
Because they currently do not have the specialty high voltage subcontractor
That's
on board,
right.
like Coluccio did. And just
Right.
a brief history on CCUR for electrical that we're talking about. Originally, we wanted to do it as a change order, like you said, with the Coluccio contract. Before we really even got to the subcontractor conflict or PUCA in that plan, it was very evident from the beginning that the price was not going to be what we expected coming from NAN. And so going out for procurement was certainly the most cost-effective route. And we also spent some time exploring, whether we could work with HECO to potentially self-perform that work, or the IBEW 1260 to perform some of that work. Based on all that, we concluded that in order to continue to meet schedule and in the best interest of the project, to go out to full procurement. So that's some of the history. That's why it wasn't included in fiscal year 24's budget presentation. We were to pursue it as a change order. That didn't work out, so we changed direction and went out for procurement.
So what
Roger.
exactly is the ask here? So the ask, as I'm listening to you, is that you want us to basically change the budget or appropriate from the 24 capital budget under CC, basically under what, CCGS. You want 100 million shifted to CCUR for a new contract? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, Chair, it is purely just what, like the conversation we were having earlier on the allocation. We thought everything would be fine covered under CCUR, but when we're going out for a new procurement, when we looked at the last time the board approved CCUR, it's like 2 or 3 years ago. So we thought better be safe, ultra conservative, get your folks approval to do the appropriation and take the money from CCGS, because we're not going to use that funds. The funds is going to lapse. And take that so that we can do the CCR 4Es.
Why would CCGS lapse? We haven't even gone out yet on CCGS. So why would those funds lapse?
The funds from the previous fiscal years, because we only have 1 year capital. We thought, we thought we had 2, but we have 1. So we just want to shift CCGS 100 million to CCR 4E, because the board never appropriated in FY24 or FY23 CCUR.
How much is going to
So as in-
lapse in fiscal year 24? I mean, how much lapsed from fiscal year 23, or would lapse from fiscal year 23? Because we did
I
appropriate.
think we asked for, it was 500
Right.
plus, right? 500 and some change.
Right.
And it was for CCGS and Waipahu Makai entrance,
Right.
neither of which have been awarded. So all of it would lapse, I think.
All of it lapsed.
Because we didn't award either of those.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
But there's still this money floating around. I mean, it would have lapsed,
Yes,
so it's
yes.
still
Correct,
floating around,
Yes.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So what you want, just so that I'm clear, what you're asking the board to do is to basically reappropriate another 100 million to CCUR for
E.
4E.
Yes,
Yes, Chair.
yes.
All right, so the money is there. It's not that. It's just a matter of shifting titles.
That's correct.
But I do remember this discussion. Yes. Okay.
So
Thank
as I understand it, the board has to approve moving the money around to cover the solicitation.
Chair,
Kitka?
thank you. So I just want to make sure I'm clear, because so you're the monies that you're asking to reallocate are monies that have already been approved by the board for the 2024 budget.
Yes.
And we're not creating a new project ID, are we?
No.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm clear. I mean, do you require board authority to reallocate these funds that have already been approved within the budget if they don't exceed the currently approved budget?
They're not approved. Changing the use of it. It's not CCGS anymore. If we had listed last year in the budget, CCGS, CCUR, and Waipahu entrance, I think we would be fine. If we had at least 100 million in CCR, but there is no line item at all in FY24 for CCUR. So I think we need your approval for appropriation.
Roger? Roger?
Just so I understand too, you're gonna be, the ask is to shift 100 million from CCGS to CCUR. Is that a result of CCUR was underestimated and requires additional funding? Or is this more of an administrative shifting of fund?
So we're only shifting funds from the fiscal year budget, but the EAC remains the same. Recovery plan EAC, none of those changes. This is just a budget exercise.
Okay.
So we're only shifting money from the fiscal year 24 budget ask or allocation or appropriation.
And you don't have any money in CCG. You already, the money you had in 23 is what you funded for CCUR. You don't have a line item in 24 for that. And you need to, because I'm just unclear as to the electrical work. Was that not anticipated previously, or?
No, it was, but we were trying to do it as a change order, and then that would fall under the same CPP.
And the
I get
reason,
it. Okay, I get that part now.
So it would come from contingency,
Yeah.
CPP, and then quickly realized that wasn't the most cost-effective way.
And your procurement is on the street now. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
So with the procurement on the street, the contract cannot be awarded or signed until the board approves the reallocation of the money. Is there any further discussion? Do we have a motion to approve the reallocation?
I'll make that motion. Roger.
Roger moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Get the second. So if there's no objection, we'll approve the reallocation of the funds to the new line item.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a discussion of the potential reallocation in addition to fiscal year 24 budget. Do we need to go into executive session, or can we just publicly discuss it? Is there any public testimony or participation on the subject? That being none,
you can have the discussion, and if you need an executive session, you can discuss it then, but I'd suggest just starting and seeing where you get to.
okay. So with no public participation or testimony, we will have a committee discussion on the reallocation for fiscal year 24 of the budget. Is there anyone that has any comment or discussion on the subject matter?
Does Hart have a explanation?
Okay, Roger.
Does Hart have an explanation of what this means?
I don't think it's us. It's you folks.
Oh, it's probably,
Yeah, I think Robert
Robert.
had an
Yeah.
issue, but perhaps we should just defer that.
can we defer this, Edwin?
Okay, yes, please.
Because
We
I
will-
think the proponent is not here, which is Roger.
the proponent not being here, we will table the subject matter to the
So
next
defer
committee
it to the
meeting.
next meeting. Don't table it, defer it.
Defer it, okay. Are there any other items to be brought up? If not, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
You guys want a 5 minute or?
I'm not on the next minute, but you have a
Quorum, we are unable to call this meeting to order. So I would like to defer all items to the next scheduled project oversight committee. And again, we apologize to the public and those watching, but thank you. And special aloha to the Maui relief efforts, again from Heart and the Heart Board. Thank you.